Did the Delhi High Court do injustice to Second Lieutenant Samuel KAMALESAN? This is the question that keeps repeating itself in the many, many responses that have come so far to the 3 videos I have already shared with you on the subject. And since many people seem to be stuck with this question or obsessed with this question, I thought it worth our while to spend a little time examining the truth of the matter. I thought all of you would be interested in this, and I sincerely hope that you would be, because this is actually our date with truth. Christians, in fact, all spiritually sensitive people, are required to be committed to truth, and therefore the substance of this video should be of universal interest. Anyway, let's get started. Did the Delhi High Court fail to do justice to Second Lieutenant Samuel KAMALESAN? I don't have to repeat the facts and circumstances of the case. That would be a superfluity. First of all, if you don't mind, let me start on a personal note. During my tenure as the principal of St. Stephen's College, I faced about 21 court cases. Why did I have to do so? Why did I go through that torture? Because litigation was one of the weapons used against me by the very powerful forces in this country who felt that the admission policy that I enunciated for St. Stephen's College, which carved out a space for candidates from the Christian community as envisaged under Article 30, Sub-Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, and as that constitutional provision is interpreted by scores of judgments, both at the High Court and the Supreme Court levels, in the last 60 years, I have taken time and trouble to study minority law, especially during the time that I was a member of the National Commission for Minority Education Institutions. So I happen to be somewhat familiar with this case, with the provisions of the law. So cases after cases were put on me to make it impossible for me to function as the principal of St. Stephen's College. But what I have to tell you is that the main source of inspiration for this legal torment that was inflicted on me was the Delhi Diocese of the Church of North India. Because I refused to surrender myself to the Bishop of Delhi, who demanded that I give him 20% of the seats in college that he may sell and make money out of it. So he decided to unseat me and establish a puppet in my place, and I refused. And he moved in the direction towards dismissing me, and I had to seek protection from the court. There also I found justice. Many cases were put on me by the Alumni Association of St. Stephen's College, then various other bodies, including the teacher associations. Now, in all of the cases, I am proud to say I got justice from the Delhi High Court. So, going by my experience, can the judges in this country be objective? Can they administer justice? Yes. At the same time, if you ask me, do the judges fail now and then to do justice? I'm afraid, yes, it happens. Why? Because judges are also human beings. Now, if in a particular instance justice is not done, it may not necessarily be because the judge concerned is corrupt or communal. It may well be because the lawyer appointed by the aggrieved party was incompetent or corrupt or indifferent to his work, and he did not argue the case properly. After all, a judge adjudicating a matter can function and come to a conclusion only according to the evidence presented to him and the interpretations offered to him. So, uh, all said and done, in spite of the fact that the justice delivery system as a whole in this country is flawed, even today I would say that I would rather trust the legal system in India than the church when it comes to obtaining justice. This is my personal experience, and this is my invariable personal experience over the last half a century. So, when Christians beat their breast in public, that this court or that court did not do justice to this Christian or that Christian, they must realize, and I say this in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the truth, they must realize that they are not particularly committed to justice themselves. When Christians clamor for justice, it's only justice for themselves, and they would rather have justice done to them, even at the risk of doing injustice to somebody else. Take for example, when I was the principal of St. Stephen's College, many influential Christians used to come to me trying to convince me that I should prefer their children or grandchildren to other Christian applicants who are far more meritorious than their children or grandchildren. For example, the moderator of the Church of North India, who was my batchmate in the Theological College, Bishop's College, Calcutta, whose son had only 62%, came to me and said that because he was the moderator of the Church of North India, and St. Stephen's College was maintained by the Church of North India, his son should be admitted to St. Stephen's College to a course of his choice simply because he was the son of the moderator. Now, the moderator, of course, knew, his name was Philip Marandi, that if I were to admit his son, I would have to do so by disqualifying another Christian candidate who is far, far more meritorious than his son. So, when it comes to an influential Christian, injustice must be done to fellow Christians in order that justice may be done to his son or daughter. This is how things work. Many of my viewers do not have direct personal experience of handling matters, and therefore they don't have actually adequate grounding in reality to understand how things happen. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm only sharing with you my experiences based on perhaps rare, incomparable experiences. All right. So now let me take another example. All of us are familiar with that very famous case, the Abhaya case. Sister Abhaya case. This young sister was murdered, allegedly by two Catholic priests and a nun. And as per reported facts, this young nun happened to see them in a compromising position, and in order to destroy evidence, they killed her and put her body in the well of the convent. This became a case, and the church did everything possible to ensure that justice was not done to the murdered nun. In fact, a very influential legal officer of this country was approached. He was at that time the Chief Justice of a particular state. And he intervened in the matter. And he intervened in the matter to the extent of interfering with and manipulating the findings of the polygraph test, the lie detector test to which the accused priests were subjected. So, are we really committed to justice? After all, the murdered nun was one of our own. How come that in this instance the church put its entire weight behind the aggressor? Because our principle is the same. Between the two parties, whichever party is richer, more influential, and more valued by the church, must be protected let justice go and jump into the well. This is our position. There's no question about it. Now take another example, the Franco Mulakal case. As I have revealed already, I had a face-to-face discussion of this matter with the victim nun. I visited the convent and interacted with her. She told me that when she had to undergo this very traumatic experience of being sexually assaulted by a bishop, she approached at least 5 bishops of the Syro-Bellava church, and all of them turned deaf ear to her. You cannot get justice from the church if the person who is doing the injustice to you is a powerful man within the church system, especially a bishop. So when it comes to our own affairs, we must be perfectly subjective, we must be partial to the church. Now, think of the Maria Kuttikala case. Father Benedict was accused of murdering her after having had a relationship with her for a long time. And the extent to which the church went to secure the protection for the accused priest. And then, after all these laborious efforts, he was acquitted by the High Court on the ground that sufficient evidence does not exist. The church then went the next mile and tried to turn him into a saint. So overnight, the murderer became the victimized saint. This is how things work. And as members of the church, we are perfectly happy, perfectly comfortable with the system. Now, for example, if there is a case in which the interest of your church is involved and that is being heard, there will be an instruction or a request issued from the office of the bishop or the supreme bishop, if you like, that all the faithful should pray so that God may influence the court and ensure that the verdict is in favor of the church. Whether or not justice is with the church, the verdict, the final verdict should certainly be in favor of the church. Why? Because it's God's business to ensure that injustice is done to others so that the interests of the church are protected. So we expect even God to be partial. Please remember, we expect even God to be partial. For example, we would expect God to destroy our enemies. Now, who knows who is in the right, you or your enemy? But because we are so subjective, we always assume that we are in the right and our enemies are always in the wrong. And therefore, God is duty bound to destroy our enemies, and protecting our interests is the same as protecting the cause of justice. That is how our crude mentality works. Now, let's consider another example. When the most complicated, highly emotional Ayodhya case was being heard, and finally the time came to write the verdict, Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, who incidentally is a product of St. Stephen's College, and I don't say this with any degree of pride, I'm just stating it as a fact, later on revealed, after the verdict was issued and all the rest of it, a few years later he revealed that before writing the verdict, he went into an act of worship and sought the guidance of God in writing the judgment. Now, whether God truly inspired him in the process is for all of you to judge. But one aspect of that judgment really strikes me as rather curious. The Honorable Court came to the unanimous conclusion that a criminal act was involved in the destruction of the Babri Masjid. At the same time, the Honorable Court gives to one of the litigants the right to have the entire property, and as a compensation, 5 acres of land was ordered to be allotted to the other party. So, was it an absolutely objective judgment? In my opinion, no, certainly not. Because the basic principle in law is that the aggressor cannot be allowed to enjoy the fruits of his aggression. That's a simple, settled matter in law. But in this case, even that was overcome. But I was not at all surprised. In fact, I don't expect anything else. And I don't say this in a derogatory manner to any of the judges or to the court, because judges are human beings, and a system is only as good as the people who work it. A system is good only to the extent that the people who work the system are good. Unfortunately, as Christians, we don't realize that we are no better than anybody else when it comes to our vested interest. We would like everyone else to be partial to our interest. Our interest must be protected, irrespective of what harm it causes to others. It is because of this that Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, neighbor can be anyone, including the person who takes you to court. Now, what Jesus here says is, Christians must set the example of objectivity. Loving a person as yourself is respecting the rights of the other person, the sentiments and needs of the other person, as much as to the same degree as you respect and value your own. This is what is called true objectivity. And objectivity is a precondition for knowing and doing the truth. You know the truth, and the basis of the truth that you know, you do justice. Unfortunately, this is not what is practiced on the ground, because people have not developed that level of spiritual maturity in which they can love their neighbor as themselves, and therefore they rather protect and enlarge their own interests at the expense of the interests of their neighbor. And therefore, when it comes to practicing justice, every human being is found wanting. So this is a reality that we have to reckon. And therefore, now coming to the Lieutenant General Samuel KAMALESAN's issue, it's possible for us to argue that Samuel KAMALESAN is a citizen of India. He is therefore covered by the provisions of the Indian Constitution. And the Indian Constitution in Article 25 grants to every citizen the right to profess, practice, and propagate his faith. The simple fact that he's a soldier does not disqualify him from enjoying the benefits of the Constitution. All this we can argue. But please understand that the legal procedure is a very special thing in itself. Law does not always work the way we think it should work. Otherwise, all of us could have gone and argued the case. In fact, when many of my cases were being argued, I thought I should go and argue, because I know the facts of the matter better than the lawyer. And I have the ability to argue, at least as well as any lawyer in this country. But I don't know the legal nitty-gritty. One small twist here and there is enough to ruin the entire case. And how things are twisted, interpreted, turned, doctored, spun is a matter of courtcraft. And it takes years and years and years of practice. Now, from my limited experience, let me say this much about how the court functions. First of all, the court is committed to protecting the law of the land, and the apex of which is the Constitution. Secondly, the court functions according to a set of doctrines. What these doctrines are, it's a very long story. Third, the judge pays attention to the interpretation of the presentation of the case law, how similar cases have been decided in the past. Fourth, the evidence presented. Fifth, how the matter is argued. Sixth, the stand of the agencies, the competent authorities involved. As I mentioned in my previous video, when it comes to an educational matter, whether it is the High Court or the Supreme Court, any court in this matter will attach supreme importance to the stand taken by the University Grants Commission. That's the only way the court can work. Why? Because the limitation of the court. The court cannot be an expert on everything. For example, in matters relating to law. Take the Orthodox Jacobite issue. I personally feel that the judgment of the Supreme Court of India issued in July of 2017 is a highly flawed case. But you don't see the Orthodox bishops who are actually very clearly aware of the injustice involved in this, speaking against it, except one man called Bishop Aprem, and you know how brutally he has been silenced. Now, why did that come about? Why did a verdict, which in our opinion does actual injustice, serious injustice on the ground, come out of the Supreme Court? Not because the honorable judges of the Supreme Court have very malafide intention. It's because the case was mishandled. It was made a mess of. And maybe certain tactics and measures were used, the details of which I don't want to examine at this time. So please understand that the judges deciding a matter are seriously limited, tied down to certain fixed principles. Now, suppose a judge knows the facts of the matter personally. He still has to rely on the documents presented and the arguments marshaled by both sides and decide entirely according to the merit of these arguments and the evidence presented to him. His subjective conviction may be different. But if he's a really trained legal officer, he must keep his subjective convictions aside and go entirely by the merit of the matter as it is argued before. That is the problem. That is how the legal system works. So we do not know in this case how well Samuel Kamalesan's case was argued. That's number one. Number two, we must understand that when it comes to anything pertaining to the army, all courts in this country will be hesitant in going against what the army considers to be the bottom line requirement of its discipline. And every court recognizes, whether you like it or not, that maintaining discipline in the army is a non-negotiable goal. And any price that has to be paid to maintain the discipline of the army is worth it. And therefore, I wouldn't be surprised if the Supreme Court also comes to a conclusion. I'm sorry to have to say this. The Supreme Court also comes to a conclusion that the discipline of the army must be upheld even at the cost of making an example of an army officer as a citizen. Now consider the implications. This time it is Second Lieutenant Samuel Kamalesan, who says, my conscience doesn't allow me to comply with the traditions and customs of my regiment. Tomorrow it will be somebody else. Day after tomorrow it will be somebody else. Please understand that an army cannot absorb this kind of local rebellion. An army as an efficient unit must think alike, act alike. And in the process, your personal, your individual rights may be abrogated. But that's the nature of the field of service you have voluntarily chosen for yourself. Now, let me give you a biblical analogy. When Jesus was accused of being an anti-Judaism subversive element, there was a discussion in the Sanhedrin. What was the conclusion? The conclusion was, it is good that one man be destroyed in order to protect the entire system. So in every culture, whether it is the Hellenic culture, the Greek culture I know, the Roman culture, the Hebraic culture, or any culture that I know, and I've taken pains to study these matters, I've not come across a single exception to this rule in every culture that history has seen. The claim of the individual will be made subordinate to the interest of the group. Now, in our Indian judicial system also, if anything is seen to be pitted against quote unquote national interests. It has zero chance of succeeding in litigation. If the government of India takes a stand and convinces the honorable judges, the honorable court, that this, whatever it may be, is against national interest, rest assured, no court will stand with an individual or a group or whatever that is working against national interest. So it is a dogma. National interest is an unimpeachable dogma. You may not like it, I may not like it, especially when we are injured or affected by it. But that's the only way the system will work. There's no other way it will work. And those who believe that systems will work in a different manner are living in a fool's paradise. Why we need clarity on this issue is, if you don't understand it, and if you think that by kicking against the rock, you can have your way because you think you are right, and you may well be right. I'm not saying that you are wrong. And you're also a child of God. For God's sake, please understand that's not how it works. Now, there are many people who will egg young people on out of their armchair interest in Christian martyrdom. But these people who would applaud you for getting into trouble will not get into any trouble for the sake of Christianity or anybody else. They're utterly dishonest. In my extensive experience with the community, all I have realized is that my fellow Christians are cowards. Cowards. A coward is one who will encourage others to walk the path of martyrdom, but will roll his tails between his legs and run for life when the slightest inconvenience comes his way. That is how 99% Christians work, in my experience. Even today, there are many priests, there are thousands of Christian believers who are convinced that what I'm saying is the truth. Not a single person has ever said to me in the last 2 years, during which I produced 2,200 videos, arguing many aspects of religion in general and Christianity in particular. Not a single response has said that what I have said is factually wrong or I'm misinterpreting the Bible, nothing of the sort. They run away from me because they are fearful that they may be seen as being pally with me or friendly with me by the church hierarchy. Such is their courage. Such is their commitment to truth and justice. And the very same people would say, all Christian youth, young people must be ready to lay down their life for Jesus Christ. Or they should be ready to have their future completely ruined for the sake of their church. Now, this is crass hypocrisy. This is hypocrisy of the highest order you can imagine. Let somebody who is willing to walk the way of Samuel KAMALESAN, not by what he is saying, but in actual practice, come out and stand in the open with him. How many people will stand with him? If tomorrow Samuel KAMALESAN says, I have threats, assuming this is not the case, for the sake of argument, I have threats from this such and such Hindu organization that if I take the matter to the Supreme Court, I'll be killed. Assume. No such threat exists. This is only for the sake of a hypothetical instance to argue a point. How many Christian zealots, all these people who are very excited about Samuel KAMALESAN ruining his future for the sake of his conviction, how many of them will in public identify themselves with Samuel KAMALESAN? Not one, not one, not one, not one, not half. That's the truth of the matter. Why all of us want our skin protected, our interests protected. After all, as I've said repeatedly to you, Christians relate to God only to have their things done, only their interests protected, their covetousness met. You examine the prayers that you offer. In how many of our prayers do we say, God, give me the courage to stand for truth, unmindful of the consequences? Or God, I'm going to stand by. In the previous video, I gave you the instance of my wanting to go and visit Manoharpur, where Graham Staines and his 2 sons were martyred. I approached several bishops. Not one person had the courage. It's not a question of going against the Supreme Court of India. It's not a question of picking a quarrel with the RSS. Nothing of the sort. You're just going to visit the site of martyrdom. Graham Staines and his 2 children were real martyrs. But I did not come across a single bishop or priest who had the courage and conviction born of commitment to truth to go with me. Only 3 nuns did. Only 3 nuns. And 52 members of other faiths. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, even 1 Jew was part of my 55-member team. That included also retired Air Commodore Lalit Ramdas. I have innumerable experiences. And the same community, a community that makes us highly selfish, and all selfish people are basically cowards, makes us sit in our chairs and say, all young men must be so idealistic that they are willing to ruin their life, their entire future, because of certain assumptions to which we pay lip service. I'm not saying that people should dump their loyalty to Jesus Christ. I'm certainly saying that there are far more convincing, creative, fruitful ways of upholding one's loyalty to Jesus Christ than simply taking an inflexible stand within a system which simply cannot tolerate it. One final point, which will contradict all that I've said so far. Now, what, in my opinion, the Honorable Court did not consider is the fact, and this is a very important consideration from my point of view, is the fact that there should be a substantial difference between normal time and wartime. During the time a war is raging, absolutely no tolerance, zero tolerance for any religious consideration should be allowed. The army should function as one unit. If at all, it has to be an army. But the situation in normal time is different. During a war, it makes a substantial difference whether or not an army officer cooperates with this regiment. During peacetime, it makes very little difference really whether or not a second lieutenant participates in a religious march. There, I think, the Honorable Court could have paid due attention, and I do not know if even that would have changed the outcome. And I say it again, it is extremely, extremely rare, extremely rarest of rare cases in which a court, whether it is a High Court or Supreme Court, would undo the disciplinary action initiated by the army, particularly based on religious convictions, because religion cannot be pitted against army discipline. Jai Hind.